Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the newest flying kayak flight video. It's winter, so we've moved from flying to sim flying, and that means that we'll be taking out this beautiful Cessna 182 Skylane by A2A Simulations for a quick hop across northern Germany. The flight we have planned today is actually a rather special one. We're going to kind of pretend that we have a little mission here. We're going to fly out to Heligoland, which is a small island in the North Sea, actually Germany's only island in the open ocean or outside of their economic zone thing. And it's especially famous because it has one of the shortest runways in Germany, definitely I believe the shortest commercial runway in Germany, with just under 400 meters on the longest runway. So this is a challenge for any airplane, and it's also a challenge for our little Cessna Skylane. So the idea is that in part 1 we'll be flying our Cessna Skylane out there from Hamburg. The weather's marginal, to be honest. It's quite low ceilings, so we'll be flying fairly low, and it might rain at any moment because the weather's not the best actually. And then from there on we'll try and fly back with a passenger, so we're picking somebody up who's got a really urgent meeting or who needs to get to the mainland for whatever reason. And that's going to be challenging because we'll be flying out with more weight than we'll be flying in, and we don't have much time. In fact, flying into Hamburg after nightfall is not really an issue, to be honest, because Hamburg is a big international airport with IFR procedures, but flying into Heligoland after nightfall is frankly impossible. So we've got 2 hours time to arrive and depart from Helgoland. That's the only time we have. It's late fall, so that means that we do have, late fall weather, and we have late fall temperatures, and of course late fall sunset times. So we'll have to arrive in Helgoland within 2 hours, and we'll have to depart again from there within 2 hours, so we don't have a lot of time, and that's our window. So let's see if we can do that. The aircraft, as stated previously, is a Cessna 182 by A2A. It's equipped with the Reality XP GNS 530 system, so it's more than well equipped for today's flight in terms of IFR instrumentation. It's a fairly new one. It's only got 9 hours on the airframe and 3 hours on the engine, so it's a good aircraft. It's new, and it's going to be a lot of fun to fly around. It's going to be a lot of fun to check out. And yeah, we should have all the performance we need for today's flight, especially if we're on a single pilot, actually. So I'll perform the pre-flight checks, and I'll be right back with you guys. Alright, so we're ready to start the engine here. So, clear prop, and there we go. My engine's started. Okay, so we've started the engine, and I've done my post-engine start checks. As you can see, this did cost us quite a bit of valuable time. So the weather outside has changed slightly, as has the time of day. Anyways, I'm going to quickly seal up the window. Yeah, just in case you can't really hear the sounds of the aircraft, I'm just going to turn them up a bit more. Yeah. There you go. In case this is too loud, I'll just have to check that later. Or I'll just turn them down again. There you go. So, first things first, we're going to enter our flight plan. Now, technically, we don't have an IFR flight plan on today's flight because, well, we're not flying IFR, right? But what we do have is we can push for a cursor. So, Echo Delta, well, Echo Lima. We do have a few GPS waypoints that I put in just as a fallback for the IFR navigation, for the VFR navigation, as we are flying in more or less marginal VFR conditions. And in order to avoid, well, getting caught in IFR conditions, which would be really bad for obvious reasons, LSOB, JK, Oh, so it doesn't have that. That's kind of bad. Yeah, so I'm using a definitely older database here. Let's see if it has our second waypoint. Probably should check that beforehand, but well, this is the way I do my videos. I obviously barely research them. Anyways, so basically I put in a few IFR waypoints simply for the reason that I'm kind of sure that we'll be in marginal VFR conditions the entire time. And that's okay because this is the simulator. So, you know, it's okay to try stuff out. Yes, we've got that intersection. We want the German intersection, except that one. And then we'll want Echo Delta X-Ray Hotel. So Echo Delta CDFGHJK PQRSTUV W X-Ray Hotel. So we'll be flying in marginal VFR conditions. That's okay because it's fairly clear that we've got the sim, so nothing can happen to us in the real world. In the real world, I probably wouldn't be flying in such conditions, but it's a sim, so we can go ahead and fly. We can pretend we're flying in the sim in those conditions and see what happens, and that's what I really like about flight simulation, that we can just do stuff that we wouldn't normally do in the real world. And that also means that we can basically check here. Okay, I would love to get up a navigation page with terrain. Perfect. Okay, so now we've got a terrain view here. That's important. That's going to be important for our departure. Now, so basically I've set the aircraft up, and we can test this out. Marginal weather, marginal visibility. Let's see how this actually goes. So I'll just taxi out to the runway, and I'll be right back with you in a few seconds. Alright, ladies and gents, we're finally ready for departure. We've selected runway number 33 for departure, because that appears to be the best runway at the moment. Okay, mixture set full forward, and my flaps are set to 20 degrees. We won't be using the entire runway. In fact, we'll be using a bit less, but that's okay because we've still got more than enough runway for a Cessna 182 to depart from. Okay, so we're all set in terms of everything else. I'm happy. I've got my fuel pump and pitot lights on. Turning this transponder over to altitude mode and smoothly start applying full power. There we go. I've got a maximum altitude of 2,500 and my right side lifted off way earlier. Okay. Basically be pulling back for green manifold pressure. There you go. And let's give it a bit of nose down trim. I haven't flown the 182 in a while. Won't be needing that much of a climb rate because we don't have so high to climb anyway. And I'll just fly in a straight line until we're over the end of the runway. And then I'll turn towards my departure VFR waypoint, which would be Charlie. Okay, there's 80 knots. I'm happy, and we're over the end of the runway, so I'm retracting my flaps. And more than enough time there. Let's keep the nose at its position. And just turn in, turn in, turn in. And we're established on our departure. Sounds and looks good. Okay, I'll just slightly reduce power. and maintain the climb here. Okay, so I'll just be back with you in a few seconds once we've departed Hamburg's airspace. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the cockpit. Now, I've just ever so slightly changed a few things about our aircraft's configuration. We're en route to the Oster waypoint, which will be our waypoint that will reach in about 12 minutes. So we've still got quite a bit of time in flight. We're doing 115 knots of ground speed, which is not too fast. It's definitely not quite as fast as I expected the 182 to go, so maybe we will have to push in a bit more power to go a bit faster. We're going very soft on the engine at the moment, but it's not too much of an issue. We should still arrive at Heligoland well before sunset. I am pushing in a tiny bit more power at the moment, just because I want to make sure that we do go a little bit faster, even though we're fairly low. I've selected a cruising altitude of only about 2,500 feet. That means that we've got a vertical distance to the next cloud layer of, approximately 2,000 feet at our destination. As you can see, the cloud layer is fairly close, so we're not actually all that far away. For some reason, my autopilot has decided not to work in this aircraft. It likes to do that quite a bit, so we'll be flying the entire flight manually, but that's not that much of a problem. At least we'll get some good hands-on flying time in the 182, so that's going to be quite a bit of fun. Okay, now we're also speeding up a bit, so that's actually quite good. We don't even have to lean the mixture because we're really flying very, very low. That's actually really nice for a change, so I'm quite happy with that. Yeah, anyways. In general, this flight should go pretty much exactly as planned. So we'll approach Helgoland. We'll have to check with a few things. We'll have to check how the sunlight is setting at Helgoland, because that will determine whether or not we'll use the runway that's facing towards the west, or how we'll decide on that. And we'll have to decide on the winds, or on the runway depending on the winds, because I'd like to use the longest runway actually. And then we'll have to decide on the visibility, if we're flying back to Hamburg as an IFR flight plan or as a VFR flight plan. As you can see, the weather is actually quite marginal. So this is a really marginal VFR. We've got marginal visibility and a low cloud base. So that's all of those things are things that in the real world would be quite concerning. But as we're in the sim, we can kind of test our limits and see how it's going. And that's what I really enjoy about simulated aviation. Yeah, the Cessna 182, which is the aircraft that we're flying at the moment, is actually an aircraft that I really like as an airplane in general. It's kind of a big brother version of the 172, or at least that's what you can say. However, that's actually fairly debatable, because while it does fulfill a quite similar role, it's a cross-country cruiser on paper. In the real world, the Cessna 172 is mostly used as a trainer and a beginner's aircraft, whereas the 182 is actually a fairly advanced airplane that can be used for IFR flying, that can be used for, well, short field aviation and that sort of thing. And it's definitely also an airplane, and that's the really fun part about it, with enough performance to work as an actual longer range cross-country cruiser. So this is definitely the sort of airplane that you'd use for the sort of flight that we're doing today. And that makes it a really cool and interesting airplane to fly, both in the sim and in the real world. Oh, it's getting a little more turbulent here actually, and the ceiling is descending, which was something that I was expecting in terms of weather. But we'll just see if the weather's good enough, or if we'll have to make our decision to turn back. Now, this is the sim, so we can test our limits. We can try out how far can we fly without having to go full IFR. Now, the cloud layer above us is not just any cloud layer. It's a broken cloud layer that's going up to 9,000 feet. So it doesn't really look like that's the sort of cloud layer that we could actually fly over in the event of, trying to do VFR on top. So that's basically not going to work. We're trapped between the ground and the cloud layer, and we're quite lucky actually that the ground is so low near Hamburg. Anyways, where was I? I was talking about the aircraft. So the 182 is a fairly high performance airplane. I believe it has around 210 horsepower. And it is delivered as a 4-seat airplane. You can have 2 kiddie seats kind of installed in the back, but those are rarely used. And let's be honest, they're not particularly comfortable anyways. So most of the time these are 4-seater airplanes. They are true 4-seaters. So you can take 4 people, a bit of luggage, and quite a bit of fuel. So that means that this airplane can actually be used as a 4-seater airplane the way you would use it in general. With a 172, you'll need 2 people, a bit of luggage, and a bit of fuel, and you'll already be at the max weight or near the max weight in general. So that's definitely something to keep in mind when you're choosing between a 172 and a 182. The added performance obviously also gives us a higher ceiling and a faster speed. As you can see, we're cruising at about 132 knots ground speed. That's something that would be a very, very stiff pace for an aircraft like a Cessna 172 to achieve. Anyways, that's more than okay for the 182. And that's really what makes this kind of a power horse of the skies. Really, this is an airplane that's so incredibly simple that it can be flown by any pilot who's familiar with the Cessna layout, which is really great about this airplane, as most pilots out there are familiar with the Cessna layout, while at the same time being a very capable airplane. So this is the sort of airplane that you'd fly for a lot of different missions, like the mission we're doing at the moment, flying out to Helgoland. Okay. So let's talk a bit about our arrival airport, because that's kind of the interesting airport in today's flight. Our arrival airport is Helgoland Airport. Now, Helgoland is an airport that's been there for quite a while, actually. This airport was established, I believe, sometime around the Second World War as a real asphalt runway airport. And the cool thing about this airport is that it's a really, really challenging airport for a number of reasons. The first challenge that this airport poses is obviously the fact that it's out at sea. So you're gonna be flying over a lot of water, and you'll see that in a moment once we're passing Ostor as our waypoint that is kind of the entry level to the North Sea. Then we'll be passing Ostor and we'll be over water. And we'll be over water for quite a while. That means that we will be out of gliding distance of land. And that's always kind of a challenge. While that fear isn't always rational, it is definitely always there when you're flying over water for longer distances or over forests or mountains. You're always kind of looking, where can I put the airplane down in the event of an engine emergency? And in the event of an engine emergency here, we only have one single chance, and that chance is to ditch. And yeah, let's hope that we get a message out to the Coast Guard in case we have to ditch, because if we don't, then we'll definitely be in some serious trouble, as the water's probably going to be quite cold this time of year. Anyways, so that's one consideration that makes Helgoland Airport a very, very challenging airport. The second consideration that makes Helgoland Airport more challenging than the rest are definitely the short runways. So Helgoland has a longest runway. I'm just going to check that real quick, so I'm not telling you any stories, but I believe that runway to be under 400 meters. So Helgoland, I'm just checking that real quick. So let me see. Alright, so I just checked Wikipedia, and I found out that the longest runway, 1533, would be 480 meters and 30 meters wide. Now that's really short as far as runways go. That's in feet, that's approximately 1,575 feet. So that's not a lot of runway distance. In fact, that's almost 200 meters shorter than the airport that I would usually fly gliders out of in the real world. So that's definitely a really, really short airport, and it's a really, really short runway. But that's the interesting part about this. And we'll see if we can actually land this airplane at that airfield. Helgoland actually has 3 runways, but the longest one is 480 meters. The shortest one, I believe, is just under 300 meters. So that's even shorter and probably a bit too short for an aircraft like the Cessna 182. In terms of wind and weather, actually, Helgoland also poses a challenge. So that's kind of the third set of challenges that Helgoland poses, because actually the wind in Helgoland has to kind of move and shift over the dunes that are at the beach of Helgoland, and that causes the wind, especially very close to the ground, to kind of form a very turbulent layer. And if you're crossing through that layer, obviously you're already in a landing configuration, so you're probably going to be close to a stall, as you want to be as slow as possible when you're approaching Helgoland with its short runways. So a single gust could throw you over the edge and stall your aircraft. So that makes that even more challenging, because you'll have to calculate, or well, you kind of have to add a bit of speed for that, making the shorter runway even shorter now. And that's really the interesting part. So you've got the wind, you've got the runway, and you've got the fact that it's out to sea. But there's another challenge, actually, and that challenge is that Helgoland is actually fairly famous for being used as a vacation spot. And what is one thing that people on a vacation definitely don't want? It's airplanes buzzing over their heads. So you'll have to avoid the main island. I think there's a pretty strict legislation and pretty strict local rulings as well on when and where you can fly over the main island. It's definitely pretty hard to actually overfly the main island of Helgoland. And at the same time, it's your responsibility to stay as far away from there and to kind of make sure that you follow all the typical noise abatement procedures down to the dots, because otherwise you'll kind of really disturb the people around Helgoland. Alright, so we're switching over to 297 degrees because we're approaching our Ostor waypoint. It's a right turn. That's actually not that much of a right turn. Let me just quickly check that we don't lose too much altitude in the turn. And we're now flying towards Helgoland, and we'll be arriving at Helgoland in 20 minutes. Now, surprisingly enough, the weather has started to clear up a bit. It's still quite foggy, so we've still got a lot of low visibility. But the cloud ceiling has more or less cleared up, which is a good thing for now. We still can't climb too high because there's still clouds in our way that would obstruct our climb. Let's see, maybe behind this cloud, once we've passed under that, maybe then we can climb a little higher so that we have a bit more gliding distance and decision altitude in the unlikely event of an engine failure. If we don't have a chance to climb higher, that's not an issue anyway, so we'll just fly along here at a lower altitude. Now, I didn't really expect the weather to clear up, actually, as I've been using Active Sky for Prepared. So the real world weather at the moment, and it's late fall. So in a late fall in Germany, you'd usually not have any form of weather that's acceptable, but apparently the weather here is good, and that's good for now, so I'm happy with that. Okay. Yeah, I'll be right back with you once we're approaching Helgoland, and I'll tell you a bit more about the scenery that I'm using in Sim today. Until then, enjoy the flight. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, we're arriving at Helgoland Airport. The scenery I'm using for today's flight, by the way, is Aerosoft's Helgoland Professional for Prepared version 4, as the simulator we're in at the moment is Prepared version 4. Yeah, so the plan is to land and do a quick turnaround. We have about an hour time before we have to leave Helgoland again. And in order to successfully do that, we will enter the traffic pattern on a downwind. And we'll do so at an approximate 45-degree angle. And that should work out for us. Exactly, okay. So basically I'm already turning into an extended downwind. We're at approximately 1,000 feet now. Pattern altitude in Helgoland is given to be anywhere between 1,000 feet and 600 feet. But we will try to stay around 1,000 feet. At least that's the plan. And we'll try to significantly slow the aircraft down now. Okay, yeah. So we do have a slight wind here in Helgoland, actually. And that's going to be a 70-degree wind with, there you go, I've got the runway in sight. It's going to be a 70-degree wind with approximately, how do I put this? So 70 degrees of wind, and it's going to be an approximate 3 knots. So that's not a lot of wind by all means. And we're abeam the runway end, so that means that I'm going to drop full flaps now, and I'm going to continue descending, and I'm going to continue decelerating, because I'll have to get towards my 60 knots, try and keep that maintained. And I'm doing a left turn now. No more than 30 degrees bank. We don't need that much bank. Now I can feed in a bit of power in order to slow my descent. Okay, so I've not actually got that much space in terms of landing here at Helgoland. Okay, and I definitely don't have a lot of room for error. Okay, so I'll just turn over into final now. Trying to maintain an airspeed between 60 and 70 knots. There's the runway. So my plan is to go straight for the end of the runway. So I'll need to use the entire runway. I've got enough time planned so that I can do a go around if it should become necessary. I'll need to put in a bit more back trim here. I've got all of my settings set straight up for my go around. Gas, undercarriage, mixtures and props. Mixtures and props are fully forward. And I've got my wind. Okay. Yeah, I'm a bit fast now. Don't like that. The speed's a bit of an issue. Oh. Wow. Okay, that wasn't the best landing I've ever done. Definitely wasn't the smoothest, and it definitely wasn't the safest. Did glide for quite a bit there. But we made it to Helgoland. Now all I have to do is actually turn on the confines of the runway, which isn't that easy here. And finish taxiing back. And then we'll be ready for the return flight. Okay. Just quickly turn off my strobe light and my landing light and my pitot heat. We're on the ground. We don't need any of those anymore. And I can turn over here to use the Helgoland. Ground charts. And turning off now. Boy, this is a really short runway here. That's for sure. Anyways, we made it to the ground and it doesn't actually look like we broke anything, so now all I need to do is taxi to the terminal. It should be right around here. And we're ready. We've just arrived at Helgoland, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Helgoland Düne. Alright, so I'll just quickly do my turnaround and we'll see each other in part 2, where we'll be flying the return leg to Hamburg. So, yeah. Have a good night, and in case you're flying anytime soon, I wish you safe travels, blue skies, and many happy landings.